Hari Om. In the fifth module of C# and .NET programming course, we have a concept called attributes. Attributes are another important concept that is used in C# programming. Now here what we are going to do, the different elements in your program such as a class or a method or a member or maybe an assembly. For these elements of your program, if you want to add some attributes, of your own, or there are some predefined attributes available. So if you want to add the predefined or a custom defined attribute to an element of your program, we can make use of the concept called attributes in C# programming. Let us see how these attributes can be used. So an attribute is an object that represents data which can be associated with an element in a program. When I say element in a program, it can be a class or it can be a method or it can be a component of a program. So here the attribute is called as a declarative tag, and it is generally used to give the information about the behaviors of various elements. What kind of elements? Such as classes, methods, structures, enumerators, assemblies, etc. But for all these elements, if I want to give some information during the runtime, then I can use attribute as a declarative tag. That is the purpose of attribute. So during the runtime, I want to give some information to the user saying that this particular method is an obsolete method, or this particular class is upgraded, or you want to define the members of this particular structure is to be used this way. So these kind of information you want to give to the user at runtime, then I can make use of the attribute, which is a declarative tag of these elements. Now we can add this declarative information to an element of your program by using the attribute. So a declarative tag for any element in your program is generally depicted by the square bracket, and it is placed just above the element for which it is described. What I mean here is, suppose say for example for a method you want to specify the method is an obsolete method. Then just above the method, you are going to have this declarative tag. Which is the declarative tag? Whatever you are going to give inside the square bracket becomes the declarative tag. So just above the method, which is the element, you are going to give the square bracket and you say this is going to be an attribute with this particular information. So the element to which you attach an attribute is called as the target of that attribute. The element, suppose if you are going to use a method for defining an attribute, then the method becomes the target of that particular attribute. Or if you are going to use a class for which an attribute is defined, then you can call it as the target of that particular attribute. So the target is nothing but an element to which you are attaching an attribute. So you are going to attach an attribute to a particular element of your program. This element is what you call as the target of the attribute. Now when you say the attributes, these attributes are generally used for adding the metadata. Now when I say metadata, what kind of metadata I can add? Say you want to give some compiler instruction for the program element, then I can make use of an attribute. Or you want to give some comments to the methods or the classes that you are having in your program, then you can make use of the attribute. Or you want to add a metadata, something like you want to describe about the class, you want to describe about the method, then for that also you can use the attribute. So in general, you can say attributes are used for adding the metadata such as compiler instruction, comments, or the kind of descriptions for any kind of element in a program. The element can be a class, or it can be a method, or it can be an assembly, or it can be a structure, enumerators, etc. Now, these are the kind of targets you can have for the attribute. So, your attribute targets can be all the elements that you are going to use in your program can be the target of the attribute. Or you can have one assembly as the target, or even the classes that you are going to declare in your program can be a target, or you want to have only the constructor. Suppose, say for example, you want to specify the user that there is no default constructor overloaded in a class. You want to give that information, then you can add an attribute to that particular constructor. Or you want to add an attribute to a delegate, or you want to add an attribute to a method, or you want to add an attribute to a particular property. For all these targets, you can easily add an attribute. So these are the different elements available in your program. So for these elements, the elements are otherwise known as target. I told you already, the elements are otherwise known as targets. So you can add attributes to all these kind of targets in a program. Now, apart from these targets, the program as a whole can also be defined with an attribute. Now, when I say a program, the program not outside the program but inside the program, you may have different namespaces. Inside the namespaces, you will have all these kind of elements. So, for all these kinds of elements, I can define an attribute. Now, when you take the attributes, there are two types of attributes available. One is a predefined attribute, the other one is a custom defined attribute. So, predefined attributes are already available, right? The attributes are already supplied by the common language runtime, or the attributes which are already available in your .NET Framework class library, or the attributes which are already defined by other DLL libraries of your .NET environment. These are what you call as the predefined attributes, right? The attributes which are already available as part of the common language runtime, or the attributes which are defined in the .NET Framework class library, or any other libraries which are having the attributes can be called as predefined attributes. The other term is intrinsic attributes. Now, apart from the predefined attributes, you can have custom attributes also, which you call as the user defined attributes. You can define your own attribute in your namespace, and that attribute can be used in your program element. That is also possible. So, we will see demo program for predefined as well as the custom defined attributes. Now the next question is, how are we going to specify an attribute for an element? How to specify an attribute? So, what are the things we have covered so far? We have seen what do you mean by an attribute, and how do you declare an attribute using the declarative tag. What is the purpose of the attribute? Why the attributes are used, or what for the attributes are used? Then what are the different targets, or what are the different elements to which an attribute can be associated? Then we have seen two different types of attributes, predefined and the custom defined attributes. Now we are going to discuss how to specify an attribute. What is the syntax for declaring an attribute? Now, if you see the syntax, I use the declarative tag as the square bracket. This is how we are going to declare an attribute. And you are going to specify the attribute name here. Specify the attribute name. Then you have to specify the positional parameters. After the positional parameters, we give the name, value, pair parameters, name value pair parameters, and then this square bracket must be followed by the element. So element here I mean by the classes or the methods or the assembly or whatever elements you have here, or it can be an interface, or it can be a data member or a data field, or it can be a property. So these are what you call as the elements. So whatever element must be associated with the attribute before the element, this is the element, just before the element you must have the declarative tag inside which you are going to declare the attribute. So this is the name of the attribute and its values are specified within the square bracket. Name of the attribute here, this is the name of the attribute, and here it will be having the values for the parameters. All the values will be specified within the square bracket. Now this must be declared just before the element to which the attribute is to be applied. And here you have two types of parameters. One is the positional parameter, the other one is the name value parameters. So the positional parameters are the essential information. So this is not optional. This is going to be a mandatory information which is to be associated with the attribute. Whereas the second or the following will be the name parameters specified, which will give you the optional information. So if you want the optional information, that can be added, otherwise you can ignore these name value parameters in the declaration. Now when you take the predefined attributes, these are some of the predefined attributes available: DLL import, serializable, CLS compliant, conditional, and obsolete. These are predefined attributes. Now this is the one which I have collected from the Balagurusamy textbook. You have DLL import attribute. It is the target is only for the method, and it is used to specify the location of DLL from where a method is to be imported. So if I want to understand from where this method can be imported, you can make use of the DLL import attribute. An obsolete attribute, the target of the obsolete attribute is the program elements, all program elements excluding the assemblies, modules, parameters, and return values. All other program elements can be the target of obsolete attribute, and it is generally used to mark the target as obsolete so that it cannot be used in future. Then you have serializable attribute. Serializable attribute, the targets are classes, structures, enumerators, and delegates, and it is used to mark the target as serializable. So when we do the remoting or marshalling, we need the serializable objects. So whether the class is a serializable object or not can be specified by using the serializable attribute. Then you have conditional attribute. The only target is the method, and it is generally used to instruct the compiler to ignore the method calls unless the relevant conditional compilation symbol is defined. So only if the condition is satisfied, this particular method can be used. So if I want to say the compiler just ignore if the condition is not met, then I can make use of the conditional attribute. Then you have another attribute called a CLS compliant attribute. Again, the target for this attribute is all the program elements, and it is used to specify whether the target is CLS compliant or not. So now you can understand all these descriptions specify some kind of metadata about these elements, right? All these description says these gives you, the attributes give you the information about these elements. They are not doing any kind of processing, but instead they give some kind of information to the user about the elements which are used in a program. So that is the main purpose of having the attributes. Attributes are not mainly used for the processing, but it is used to give some kind of information to the programmer or to the user of that particular program. So if you have added some kind of elements like methods, classes, structures and enumerators, and you want to give some kind of additional information to the programmer saying that this enumerator can be used only in this particular format, or you want to say the starting index value for a particular enumerator is 100, or you want to inform the user that the structure is having this many number of data fields, or you want to inform the user saying that the structure is having a field member which is going to be of string data type. So this kind of information you want to share with the user, then you can make use of the attributes. So attributes are nothing but the objects that give information about an element in a program. Now let us see a demo program which is using a predefined attribute. It is going to use predefined attribute. Let me increase the size. Okay. So I am going to all the demo programs. Let me show you the demo program first. Attribute demo.cs. So this is the program which I have used, and this program is using the obsolete attribute which is a predefined attribute. Now observe the program here. As usual, we have the using directive for the system namespace, and I declared a class here, and I am declaring an attribute. I am declaring an attribute using the square bracket. I am declaring it, and you can see here I want this attribute to be associated with a method called display, because method is also one of the elements or targets of a attribute. So for the obsolete attribute, I want to associate, or I want to have the display method as the target. So just above this target or the element, I am declaring the attribute. So I can easily understand this attribute is associated only for this particular method, right? And when I am declaring the attribute, you can observe here I give the attribute name, right? I give the attribute name as obsolete, and I give a parameter, positional parameter. I give the positional parameter here, which is a mandatory one. Then I am giving the optional parameter, which can be given or need not be given. So by default, it is going to be the false value. And if you want to make it true, you can make it true. Let us see what is the difference between true and false. Okay. Now what actually I tried to say here is, if a user is using the display method without a parameter, I just want to inform the user it is a deprecated method. Instead of using the display method without parameter, please use the method display by passing a string argument, so that I inform the user not to use the display method without any parameter. Instead, use the display method that is having one string parameter. So that is what I am going to do in the program. So let us see what happens when I run this program. I am going to compile this program. I compile this program, and you can observe here it is giving you a warning message saying test.display is an obsolete method, and this is the matter I have given inside the attribute, right? In the positional parameter, this method is deprecated. Use the method display string instead. This is the information I have associated with the obsolete attribute, right? Now I have compiled it, and when I am going to run this program, let us see what happens. I am going to run this program, and it is running successfully because I don't have any display message. If you want, I can have a display message also here, so that the display message will be, so if you want, you can add console dot write line. This is just to so I say it is a deprecated method, right? So it becomes an obsolete method. I'm going to compile the program. I execute the program and it says it is a deprecated method because I have invoked the display method in the program. You can observe in the program you are invoking the display method, right? So after invoking the display method, it goes here and it will be displayed. But it gives a warning to the user saying that it is already an obsolete method. That is the advantage here, right? Now suppose, say for example, I am going to change the parameter, that is the optional parameter with value true. I am going to change the optional parameter with value true. Right, I change it here. I am going to compile the same program and you can see now it is showing you as an error message. Earlier, when the second parameter was false, it was showing me the message as a warning message, but now it is showing you as the error message, right? So that is what we have seen. Attributes can be used for adding metadata such as compiler instruction. That is what we have seen in the attributes. For what we are using the attributes are used for adding the metadata. It is used for adding the metadata. What kind of metadata you can add? You can add compiler instruction. So that is what we have done here, right? So we have done here the when I am trying to compile my program, the attribute message was displayed here as a warning message, whereas when I tried compiling it here, the attribute message was given as the error message and not as the warning message. So that is the purpose of having the attributes in a program. So during the runtime or during the compilation, if you want to share an information to the user, then you can make use of this particular attribute. So sometimes in your library, in your namespace, you might have declared lots of classes. Some of the classes must be an obsolete class, but your end user may be using that particular class in your program because your version, you have upgraded the version that the user is using the previous version. So by the time you want to inform the user that this is an obsolete data, this is an obsolete method, this is an obsolete class, for which I can make use of the attributes. Okay, so that is what is shown here. The obsolete is specified as the attribute name, and the positional parameter which we have given as the obsolete message. Then we have used the name parameter, which is an optional parameter with true or false, right? So any attribute declaration will have the attribute name and not like this. It will have the attribute name here. Attribute name, and the parameters will be specified within the parenthesis. So this is how you will be declaring an attribute, right? You declare an attribute like this, and here this will be the attribute name, and the string, the first parameter string will be the attribute information, and the second parameter tells the compiler to treat the use of the item as an error. So by default the value will be false, so that the compiler will be generating a warning message, and if you change it to true, then the compiler will be generating it as an error message. So this is what we have seen in our demo program. So this was the demo program we have seen. I have declared the attribute obsolete just above the display method. I have used the string here, which is the information, and the second parameter is true or false, that specifies whether it has to generate it as an error message or as a warning message. So by default it is false, so that it will be generating this message as a warning message, whereas if it is going to be true, it will be generating it as a error message, right? So that is what we have seen in the attributes. Let us discuss custom attributes in the next video. Thank you.